Last summer, my boyfriend Jake and I decided to take a much-needed break and head to a secluded cabin in the mountains. We had found the perfect spot on Airbnb, a cozy, one-bedroom cabin nestled deep in the woods, far from the noise of the city. The pictures showed a charming little place with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a porch that overlooked a small lake. It seemed like the ideal getaway for a romantic weekend. We packed our bags, loaded up the car, and set off on a Friday morning. It took us about 7 hours to get there. The drive was long but scenic, with winding roads that took us higher and higher into the mountains. By the time we arrived, the sun was starting to set, casting a golden glow over the trees. The cabin was exactly as advertised, secluded, peaceful, and surrounded by nature. We were thrilled. The first night was perfect. We cooked dinner together, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on the porch, listening to the sounds of the forest. The air was crisp, and the stars were incredibly bright. I think I even saw a shooting star. It felt like we were in our own little world, far away from any worries. We spent the next day hiking and exploring the area. By the time we got back to the cabin, we were exhausted and immediately jumped into the shower. Unfortunately, the water was cold, but it still did the trick. Starving from the hike, we decided to have an early dinner. As we were eating, Jake looked up and said that he had heard something outside, a rustling in the bushes. I told him not to worry, it must have been an animal. The woods were full of wildlife after all. After dinner, we settled in on the couch by the fireplace. I was reading a book. Jake was scrolling through his phone. The fire crackled softly. The cabin was warm and cozy. Suddenly, we heard a loud thud, like something hitting the side of the cabin. We jumped up in our seats. Jake got up to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. I stayed inside. I started to feel uncomfortable. About a minute later, he came back in. He looked puzzled, said he hadn't seen anything, but he was sure the noise had come from the side of the cabin. We went ahead and double-checked that every door and window was locked. Feeling slightly anxious, we settled back down on the couch and went on with our evening. After we got to bed, we started hearing noises again. At first, they were sporadic. A knock, a rustle. Not loud that would make you jump out of bed, but loud enough to notice. As time passed, it became more frequent and more intense. I looked at Jake and he said it almost sounded like someone, or something, was walking around the cabin, trying to find a way in. My heart was racing, and I could see in Jake's face that his confidence was starting to fade. We didn't dare leave the bedroom. Our shutters were closed, and I once again made sure that the bedroom door was locked. We tried to stay calm, told ourselves it must be a deer or something. But deep down, we both knew that whatever was out there wasn't acting like an animal. The noises were too deliberate, too purposeful, too human-like. Around midnight, we heard a loud bang on the front door. It was so forceful that the entire cabin shook. Jake leaped to his bag and grabbed his pocket knife. I got my phone and called 911. The operator assured us that help was on the way, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and it would take at least 1 hour for anyone to reach us. The banging continued, growing louder and more aggressive. At this point, we were certain whoever was out there was determined to break in. We moved a sideboard that was in the bedroom in front of the door, huddled together on the bed, waiting for help to arrive, but every second felt like an hour. Finally, just after 1 a.m., we heard the sound of a vehicle pulling up to the cabin. The banging stopped abruptly, and the cabin fell silent. We couldn't be sure that it was the police. We stayed in the bedroom. There was a knock on the door, a lot quieter and politer than the banging earlier. We didn't move. A few seconds later, another knock, followed by a man identifying himself as police. We made it. We hugged ourselves for at least 10 seconds before removing the barricade and opening the front door. We let the 2 police officers into the cabin and explained what had happened, still shaken from the night. The officers sweeped the nearby area but didn't find anyone. On various windows of the cabin and on our car, they found marks that resembled attempts of forced entry. On the front door of the cabin, they also saw that the door had been damaged, as if someone had tried to use a crowbar to get in. We packed up our belongings and headed to a motel for the remaining night. But we didn't get much sleep. The next morning we traveled back home, cutting our vacation short. We never found out who had been outside that night, but the experience left us both deeply unsettled. To this day, these memories creep me out. We haven't been back to any cabin in the woods since, and I don't think we ever will. We contacted Airbnb and the person who rented out the cabin. They both agreed to give a full refund. My best friend Emma and I decided to take a tropical vacation to celebrate our college graduation. We had been dreaming of a relaxing beach getaway for months. After some research, we settled on a small private island resort in the Caribbean. Definitely not the cheapest place, but we treated ourselves. The pictures online were stunning: crystal clear water, white sandy beaches, luxurious bungalows perched over the ocean. It looked like paradise. We couldn't wait to escape the stress of the finals and enjoy some sun. The journey to the island was an adventure in itself. We flew into a nearby city, took a small propeller plane to a coastal town, and then boarded a small boat that would take us to the resort. The boat ride was about an hour long, and as we got closer to the island, we could see the bungalows on the shoreline. It was even more beautiful in person than in the photos. We were so excited. We were greeted by the resort staff with cold towels and welcome cocktails. The atmosphere was great. The resort itself could hold around 100 people, but they told us it wasn't high season. It was about half booked. Our bungalow was incredible, spacious, modern, and with a private deck that overlooked the ocean. We spent the first day lounging on the beach, swimming in the turquoise water, sipping cocktails. Boy, we had a great time. The staff at the resort were very attentive, almost to the point of being intrusive. They would appear out of nowhere, walk onto our private deck while we were lying there in our bikinis, ask us if we wanted any more drinks. At first, we attributed it to good customer service, but after the first few days, it started to annoy us. It almost felt like we were being watched. Every time we left our bungalow, someone would be nearby, smiling, and asking if we needed assistance. One night, we were having dinner at the resort's restaurant. The food was delicious, the cocktails as well. I remember slightly feeling the alcohol, but reminded myself it was fine. We were on vacation. We got back to our bungalow. Upon entering, we noticed that the room had been made up while we were gone. Our nightwear had been laid out on the bed, and 2 cocktails with lots of ice standing on our table. Emma called the front desk to complain. The staff shouldn't be going through our personal things. They apologized, said they would follow up on it. We checked to see if anything was missing, but everything seemed to be there. We didn't drink the cocktails they made for us. Something didn't feel right, but we had no way to prove it. The next morning we got up and went to breakfast, slightly hungover from last night. We decided that we were going to explore the island today, get away from the resort, clear our minds from the unsettling experience last night. We had brought our hiking boots along, so why not? We went to the front desk to ask if they could recommend a route. The guy at the desk smiled and pulled out a map. He started marking the route for us, said it was his special tip. After mapping it out, he asked us if we were planning on doing it today. We said yes. He asked what time. We said we didn't know yet. He asked again if we were sure that it would be today. I asked if there was a problem. He said no, not at all. That the resort likes to keep a tab on where their guests are. We thanked him, took the map, and left. On our way back to the bungalow, we looked at each other. We both felt unease. Why did the guy want to know exactly when we were doing the hike? We got back to the bungalow and did some research on our phones. The island wasn't huge. but there were loads of hikes you could do. We didn't find the route that was recommended to us anywhere. I looked at the route more closely. It was definitely more remote compared to the others. Parts of it weren't even on official paths. Neither of us said it, but we were both thinking the same thing. This didn't feel right. We decided to stay in our bungalow that day. Made sure to hang the "Do Not Disturb" sign on our door. We didn't leave the close vicinity of the resort much the remaining few days. We smiled at the staff that was still lurking around every corner, but didn't engage in any small talk. We also tried to block off the side entry to our private deck to prevent them from entering. It seemed to work. We did pass the front desk a few times, but I never saw the guy that recommended the route to us again. We boarded the boat that would take us back to the main island. We arrived back at the coastal town an hour later, once stepping off the boat. We both felt relieved. We weren't sure if we had overreacted. After all, nothing had happened. Was this just the way the Caribbean people treat their guests in these prestigious resorts? Maybe. But we didn't feel safe. And that's all that matters. Out of respect to the resort, I will not share the name or the island, but it definitely wasn't the trip me or Emma had hoped for. A couple years back, my brother Mark and I finally put our long-awaited road trip through the Southwest into action. Our goal was to explore the desert landscapes, something we hadn't experienced so far as we live up north. We had planned the trip out for months, located potential campsites, and bought all the gear that was necessary. We were looking forward to the adventure of a lifetime. The first 2 weeks were incredible. We drove through breathtaking scenery, hiked in red rock canyons, and watched the sun set over the desert. One night, we found a last-minute camping spot in a remote area near the Arizona-Utah border. And when I say remote, we were the only campers here. In fact, we hadn't seen any other signs of life that day. The campsite was in a small isolated valley, surrounded by sandstone cliffs. It was peaceful and quiet. We set up our tent. Nothing fancy. Mark built a small campfire, and we spent the evening chatting and drinking Bud Light. Pretty much what we had been doing most nights so far. We woke up early the next morning. We wanted to hike a nearby trail that promised stunning views of the valley we were in. We were packing up all our gear when Mark noticed a set of fresh tire tracks leading into the campsite. The tracks looked fresh enough to be just a few hours old, but we hadn't heard any vehicles during the night. We thought it was strange, but we also didn't think too much of it. Probably someone else arrived late at night and left early. We got back to the campsite in the early afternoon. It was as we left it. Not another soul in sight. But once we got closer to our spot, we both stopped in our pace. The zipper of our tent was wide open. Mark and I were 100% sure that everything was closed up before we left. There was nothing missing. We had locked all our belongings in the car, so the tent was completely empty. I checked the car for any signs of foul play, but found nothing. Mark tried to reason it could have been an animal looking for food. But then we saw footprints in the dirt. Not animal tracks. Boot prints. They led from our tent a couple yards into the campsite before disappearing in the wind. That was the moment we both started to feel creeped out. Who had been here? Maybe another hiker had stopped by and looked around while we were gone. Even if that was the case, why would they just go ahead and open our tent but not close it up again? That night, we decided to sleep in the car instead of the tent. We parked it close to the campfire and locked the doors, just to be safe. We also didn't feel like drinking this time. Around midnight, we were woken up by the sound of an engine. We sat up and looked out the windows, but it was pitch black outside. The sound grew louder, and then we saw headlights approaching from a distance. What looked like a pickup truck pulled into the campsite and stopped about 30 yards from our car. The engine idled for a few minutes, and then the headlights turned off. We couldn't see who was inside, but we both felt an unease. Mark whispered to me, asking what to do. but I didn't have an answer. After what felt like an eternity, the truck's engine revved, and it drove away. We stayed in the car, still not quite sure what just happened. This person didn't come back to the campsite that night, at least not by truck. After a rather sleepless night, we packed up our campsite the next morning as quickly as possible and got back on the road. The next day was uneventful, and we seemed to put the last night's event behind us. But the following day, as we were on the road, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. It was far away, but it appeared to be a vehicle. A black pickup truck. As I said, we were in the middle of nowhere. We hadn't seen many other cars since embarking on our journey. The car seemed to be getting closer to us. As the car was about 50 yards behind us, it flashed its lights at us. My first thought was that maybe it was an emergency and they needed our help. But that's when I realized I had seen those headlights before, at the other campsite. I couldn't be completely certain, because it had been at night. But what were the chances? I asked Mark what to do. He told me to keep going. For the next hour, the car stayed on our tail, always between 50 and 60 yards behind us. We didn't know what to do. My hands were getting so sweaty I could hardly grip the steering wheel. Finally, we saw the first sign of civilization. A gas station up ahead in 20 miles. 30 minutes later, we pulled into the gas station. We looked back to see if the car behind us would follow. It definitely wasn't the busiest gas station, and not the most welcoming one either. But there were some people around. That gave us a sense of safety. The black pickup truck didn't pull into the gas station. It stayed on the road and passed us. Its windows were blacked out, so we couldn't recognize the driver. It happened so fast we didn't have a chance to catch the license plate either. We asked around at the gas station if anyone knew anything about a black pickup truck, or if they were aware from other travelers experiencing something similar. They didn't. They told us that there was a sheriff's office in the next town, 30 miles away. We decided to head towards it. On the way, we were on hyper alert, checking everything and everywhere for the black pickup truck. But we didn't see it. We got to the sheriff's office and told them what happened. But there wasn't much they could do. We spent the remaining days of our trip sticking to more populated areas. But the experience left us on edge. Everywhere we went, we kept looking over our shoulder, just waiting to spot the black pickup truck. Luckily, we never did. We got home a few weeks later. I did some research and found out that the area we had been camping in had a reputation for being a hotspot for illegal activity in the past. Something along the lines of smuggling and theft. It was a sobering reminder that even in the most beautiful places, danger can lurk just out of sight.